Hi, it's Amy Shaw, the Soul Whisperer here. What I want to talk about in this video is the idea that schizophrenics are shamans. The reason this came up is because yesterday morning I saw a post in the Shamanic View of Mental Illness group on Facebook. When I first joined that group a couple years ago, it had much fewer people than it does now, and I think it's well over 10,000, might even be close to 20,000 members now. So it's grown exponentially in a really short period of time. And obviously with that many people in the group, you get this very interesting dynamic and mix of cultures and religions and beliefs and ideas. And so the discussions in there sometimes get very colorful and lively. And someone had posted the question of what is a shaman. It's a common question that comes up in that group, actually. And so as I was looking through, filtering the answers just out of curiosity, seeing if there was any resonance with what some of the other people were saying, I started to notice that there was a lot of people, a lot of responses that were saying that schizophrenics are shamans, or people who are psychotic are shamans. And so I really want to talk about that because I do believe that this is a stereotype, an unfortunate stereotype of shamanism, and I really would like to dispel that as much as I can. In thinking about this as a stereotype and where that idea came from, I was reminded of an article that came out, I think, around 2013, maybe 2014 is when I first saw it, and it was called "What a Shaman Sees in a Mental Hospital." The article was actually about a man that they're calling a shaman. His name is Malidoma Somé, and he is a very strong figure in the men's movement that's happening in the United States right now. So a lot of his work is coming up in men's conferences. He's done a lot of writing, and he just offers a lot. He is more of a shamanic individual, but he's not actually an American. He was born and raised in Africa, in a country in Africa. So he brings that wisdom. And the article was about, he's a doctor, was about Malidoma's experience of going into a psychiatric facility in the United States and how shocking it was for him. Because in his country, they don't have such a thing as mental illness. They don't have the DSM, or they don't use the DSM. They don't have psychiatric facilities. So at the first sign that someone was displaying what we would call psychotic symptoms or psychotic behaviors, they would identify that person as potentially a shaman. And they would kind of pull them aside and mentor them and, get them to a certain point where they could endure shamanic initiations. And so they deal with mental illness very different in their country. So he came to the United States. He went through a psychiatric facility. He was shocked. And if I remember correctly, the article also does speak about how he saw a lot of demonic entities attached to people in the mental hospitals. And so there was something to that as well, that how tormented that they are, which is a really interesting aside bar actually on this topic, because there was a researcher from Stanford University who, and I believe, if I remember correctly, you'd have to Google it, that she was an anthropologist. And she wanted to study psychosis, or specifically auditory hallucinations, hearing voices. So she studied individuals in the United States that have auditory hallucinations, as well as individuals in other countries that also have, psychotic symptoms of auditory hallucinations. And what she found is that the people in the United States consistently reported that the voices were negative, they were malevolent, they were mocking, they were encouraging people to harm themselves and harm other people. They had very violent overtones to them, and so they were very negative, heavy, dark experiences. But in no other country did people experience their auditory hallucinations like that. In other countries, they perceived them actually the opposite. They were very positive, they were very encouraging, they enjoyed the voices. And so, I think the implication of that study is that to some degree the experience of the voices, what they're being told, how people are experiencing them, is in part cultural. So that's a very interesting phenomenon, something to consider in this discussion, but it's kind of a sidebar because either way what I'm really referring to is people who have been labeled with schizophrenia. And so auditory hallucinations is one potential symptom for psychosis. So I think this idea that people that are schizophrenic are shaman, kind of, it comes from, it's a stereotype that comes from that notion that in our country we have misidentified our shamanic individuals. We have, jailed them, we have hospitalized them, we have, done all sorts of horrendous things to them, actually, medicated them against their will, forced psychiatric treatment, and all these kind of things, that a lot of these people actually are shamanic individuals. And again, I would say I believe that this is in part a stereotype, and I'm going to get into this a little bit. So, first of all, I would say that not every single psychotic individual is shamanic. I would also say that maybe it is possible that many of them are shamanic initiates. Okay, but I have talked in previous videos about the difference between being a shamanic initiate and actually being a shaman. And also I've talked about what a pathologically failed state of shamanic initiation can look like. So I think, unfortunately, for a lot of people in our culture who are mentally ill, if they are shamanic types, they tend to fall into pathological states of failed initiation. And whether that's because their symptomology is so severe, whether it's because they don't have the ego strength to actually get through the initiation in the fullness of it, whether it's because of their circumstances, whether it's because they don't have access to proper mentors and proper elders that can assist them, which is very, very likely the case. They a lot of times, people that are mentally ill, they don't even know that potentially they are shamanic initiates. So if they don't know, then they get this label, by allopathic medicine that tells them they're this or they're that, and here's the treatment for this and here or for that. And so they exist in this sort of cycle of the mental health system, where they're constantly in and out of psychiatric facilities or trying to find psychotropic drugs that will tamp down their symptomology. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be psychosis. I think that's the popular assumption, is that schizophrenia equals shamanism. In actuality, it can be a whole spectrum of diagnosis, mental health diagnoses. It could be mood disorders, bipolar 1, bipolar 2, major depression, schizoaffective disorder, and potentially I would say that even the personality disorders, some people that are experiencing that may also be shamanic initiates as well. And that's simply because personality disorders tend to evolve out of trauma, childhood traumas, and so childhood trauma itself can be a shamanic initiation. So I don't want to just limit this to say only psychosis. I think that the whole range and spectrum of psychiatric diagnoses, potentially we can be looking at people that are shamanic initiates. But to say that all people who are psychotic are shamanic initiates is a stereotype. And to say that all shamanic people are psychotic is a stereotype. And I did talk about that in the last video I made, the difference between stereotypes and archetypes. And I really want to make an effort to educate people about this and to encourage them to guard against making these kind of stereotypes, because they can be potentially dangerous and harmful to everybody involved. And so to get into it a little bit more in terms of, we'll just go with psychosis because that was the predominant one. To get into it more in terms of psychosis, and its relationship to shamanism, let's just assume that somebody's having auditory hallucinations and that they actually, what they're experiencing is voices of the spirits talking to them, and actually what they're suffering is the shaman sickness, which is going to persist until they actually get their feet firmly planted on a shamanic initiation path with an elder, and can work towards being a shaman themselves and being of service to their community, to their tribe. So let's just assume that. Let's assume that that's what they're hearing. They're hearing spirit voices, and but they're caught in this system. They're caught in this roundabout system of mental health care, and they're not aware of it. Okay, that's the caveat. Let's just assume that they're not aware that they actually are a shamanic initiate. So what happens over time, is because they're caught in this system, because they're highly medicated, and the medications, no matter if you're shamanic initiated or you're not, if you're seeking psychiatric help, it's because the symptomology that you're experiencing is so severe that you do not feel that you can continue on with the symptoms. It's either significantly affecting your life in some way, it's affecting your ability to be a responsible adult, to function with the expectations that are put on you in this culture that we're in. And so people will seek psychiatric medication, psychiatric treatment to address the symptoms. For a psychotic individual, this could potentially mean trying to drown out or tamp down the spiritual input that's coming through you. For somebody that's bipolar, that could potentially mean trying to tamp down the feeling and flow of those creative energies as they come through you. For somebody that's suffering major depression, that could be trying to tamp down and not allow yourself to experience the shamanic death. And so, we can see how potentially psychotropic medications can derail the shamanic initiation process, which quite honestly is a very hard process. It's long, it's grueling, it's dangerous. There's potential for death on many, many levels. It's not uncommon to see indigenous shamans that are missing limbs, that are missing fingers or toes, that are missing an eye, that have scars all over their bodies. And a lot of this is because of the initiation process, the things that they've been through. It's incredibly hard in the culture that we're living in. I don't think that there's a get out of jail free card. The shamanic initiation is equally hard and dangerous and difficult in different ways, but it's not uncommon, to see shamans that are hobbling a little bit, that are scarred up a little bit, that are maybe missing some body parts or have been through some serious physical illnesses as well as mental health issues. But what happens is if we're taking a large amount of psychotropic medications, particularly for long periods of time, this becomes actually a pathological failed state of initiation because you're not really allowing yourself to go through the fullness of the shamanic initiation, the fullness of the purification process. You're trying to actually avoid it, tamp it down and avoid it and not go through it. And so especially again, going back to if you're not self-aware. If you're not self-aware that you are a shamanic initiate and you're aware of the process, you're aware that the role that psychiatric treatment, that psychotropic medications are playing in your life as well as in your initiation process, if you're not aware of that at all, then you really can spiral down and buy into the label and the social ostracism that comes from that, the victim mentality that comes from that, and all the things. So it's not surprising to me that Malidoma Somé, who's a very shamanic individual in his way of thinking, in his culture, can come to the United States and walk through a psychiatric facility and see the torment, see the level of, entity attachments and, just that very heavy energy and malevolence that's going on in those types of places. It's not surprising. I recently watched a documentary. It's called The Work, and I highly recommend it. I believe that it was based on the work of Malidoma Somé. They went into a high security prison in California and did some amazing, deep, healing shamanic work with these men who were, multiple time felons, a lot of them sentenced to life in prison. So if you want a little taste of that, I encourage you to check out that documentary and watch it if you have the opportunity. But anyway, going back to that article, What a Shaman Sees in a Mental Hospital, and explaining Maladome's experience of American psychiatric system, I think that potentially that is the dangerous thing, is to just assume that every psychotic person is a shaman is a stereotype. It's a dangerous stereotype. Going back for a moment to talk about the auditory hallucinations and just assuming that those actually are spirits, that this is a shamanic initiate and this psychotic individual is actually hearing and experiencing spirits. The level of mastery that it requires to command the ego in such a way that it can get through the initiation process, that a person can, transmute that and put that to use into knowledge in practice. It requires an incredible amount of ego strength and also mentorship and support and being able to master the states of consciousness is essential to shamanic work. Somebody that suffered for decades of psychotic symptoms who is unmedicated is virtually not able to function. This is somebody that's most likely even homeless or, struggling with day-to-day life. Even basic self-care can be very difficult for somebody in this state. So this is somebody who really has not mastered those states of consciousness, of being able to tune in and lean into spirit when it's necessary to do that, and to shut that off and put those boundaries there and get back to functioning in the way that our culture expects us to function as adults. And so moving in and out of consciousness, whether that's because you're hearing spirits, whether that's because you're seeing spirits, however that information's coming through, whether that's being bipolar and feeling the fluxes of the energies, whatever your brand or flavor of mental illness might be, having mastery over that is essential for shamanic practice. So I think it's dangerous to say that schizophrenic people are shamans. It's a dangerous stereotype that we really need to dispel. By the time someone's actually gone through enough initiation, decades long of initiation, purification, transmutation, to actually get to that point of being in shamanic service in a way that's, has integrity and impeccability and is not harmful to the self or to other people in the community. To get to that point, that you really do have to have a complete mastery over that. So this is a person that should not be unstable or dysfunctional in any sort of way. And I think the notion, that shamans have to be a little bit eccentric or should be eccentric, also is a stereotype in a sense. I think, bringing the maturity and the stability, the wisdom, that comes from elderhood, the sort of quiet yet powerful sense of self is an essential part of shamanic practice. And so to wield that, to wield all of that in such a way that you're being of service and putting it to use to the benefit of other people, it just requires a tremendous amount of ego strength. And I think that somebody who's, in the throes of what we would call psychosis, who is relying entirely on medication, and hasn't done a lot of the transmutation work in learning how to work with their particular mental illness, then then I would argue that they're not a shaman. They're not a shaman. And there is a difference between being a shamanic initiate and being a shaman. When you're in the initiation phase, you're still working through all those processes. You're still trying to embody the fullness of that shamanic archetype self within the self and the expression of the self. And that's not to say that people who are going through shamanic initiation, who are still in that process, especially as you get towards the tail end of it, that they can't be of service or that they're not of service, because that's certainly not the case. I mean, we all are in a state of learning no matter who or what we are. We never get to that point, and I've said this 100 times, where we say, okay, I've arrived now and now I can stop learning. That will never ever come. each incarnation is because we're here to learn. And in this life, in this incarnation, right now, in this consciousness, we're here to learn. So we never, even as someone transitions from being just an initiate to a shaman of service, they don't stop learning. They continue learning. And being an initiate, you can have periods where you learn something profound and you want to make a video about it, or you want to give it to somebody in your community or to your shamanic circle or whatever you have going on. You can give back and be of service and be of value to somebody, but yet you're still actually in the initiation process, and that can happen. So I'm not trying to say it's a very clear line between, well, you're initiate, so you can't be of service and you can't be doing shamanic work. That's not the case at all. You're still of service and doing the work as you're going through initiation process. But the fundamental difference between being the fully embodied practicing shaman and the initiate is, number one, still being in process. Not that you're ever out of process. Some of us, I think that's just our personality. We are processors, and so we will always somewhat be in process. But what I'm getting at is the level of mastery, and being in one's power, and all these things that are essential to strong, shamanic practice that has integrity. It requires so much to get to that point. And so I think that this is why a lot of quote unquote psychotic people end up as failed shamanic initiates, because what they have to overcome, not only within themselves and working with their particular gifting and how they receive the information from the spirit world, but overcoming the system, the culture and the system that tries to label them, ostracize them, shame them, victimize them, force them into psychotropic treatments as the only means and the only path to deal with their quote-unquote symptoms. And so it's not surprising. It's not surprising that there's a lot of failed shamanic initiates. But once again, I think it's just very, very dangerous to say that schizophrenic people or psychotic people or mentally ill people in any diagnosis are shamans. Or likewise that shamans have to be, have some sort of mental health diagnosis, or, be eccentric or be unstable or be on psychotropic medications or be in psychiatric treatment. That's definitely not the case. I think that you want somebody that's maybe come through stuff, not necessarily that. It's part of the shamanic path to, go through these initiations where we've been through stuff. Some of it's, like I said, physical trials, some of it's mental, emotional trials and tests and initiations, and we've all been through these things, and you want somebody that's been through these things, but you want somebody that's come out on the other side and has, like I said, that strength. So I'm still reading this book. I talked about it before, and I've shared it before. I'm a slow reader. I'm reading actually a couple other books also at the moment. So I vacillate between the 3 books. But I'm almost done with this, actually. And synchronous timing. And I read this today. It completely pertained to what I wanted to talk about in this video. So I just want to read it. The book is The Magician Within, Accessing the Shaman in the Male Psyche by Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette. Okay, and this is the chapter on the shamanic potential in contemporary men. So they say, it can be helpful to remember the lessons of some of the world's great spiritual traditions. An important one is that the enlightened man is ordinary. He has crossed the threshold into the 3rd stage of initiation and has returned to ordinary space. Because a man is extraordinarily charismatic does not mean he is enlightened. Like Moses coming down off Mount Sinai, he shines, and he does not know he is shining. And like Moses, his proximity to the numinous may cloud his judgment as to what course of action to take. When choosing a guide, choose him carefully. So I really like that passage because that I think that that's really what they're talking about, is the ability to go into the spiritual realms and come back into this realm and be here, be stable in that, and to be able to switch in and out of the states of consciousness with ease. That really is, I believe, the staple, the core of any shamanic practice, regardless of what facet or what gift or how those are experienced. The core, the strength of it is being able to do that. Having mastery over thought, mastery over emotion, and mastery over one's personal spiritual gift or language, and being able to master the states of consciousness, to move in and out of shamanic consciousness basically on a dime. And so that's, I don't think that a lot of people that are entrenched in a mental illness are truly able to do that. So if they get in the right relationship with the right elder, it's possible that they may be able to redeem some of that and recover from some of that, and get on a healthy path of initiation that will eventually lead to them being of service to other people. But yeah, if they're in active psychosis, or if they're entrenched in the mental health system and they're unstable, they're sort of rotating in and out, or on and off of psychotropic medications, and they may have not even fully awakened to the fact that they are potentially shamanic initiates, then I would say no, I definitely wouldn't call that person a shaman. So anyway, I hope I offered some clarity. I hope that I dispelled some of the myths of the shamanic stereotype. And I just want to encourage you that if you think that you're on a shamanic path, it's really important to find an elder, somebody that can sort of guide and help you, be a mirror for you, can help you stay true to your path, to your unique expression of the path, and can kind of walk you along that process of initiation and transmutation that hopefully will culminate to a point of you being in shamanic service. So thank you guys so much, as always, for watching my videos. It's an honor that you come to my channel, that you watch. I just want to remind you again that I am a shamanic practitioner in the Austin, Texas area. So if you're in the local area, or you're willing to drive into the area, I would love to meet with you in person, have a session with you. If you're not, that's okay too. I also do distance work, and I'm available for that. So if you look around my channel, you'll find a lot of different ways that you can actually contact me. And if you have questions or comments, you just want to discuss this more, share your own experiences, I'm always happy and open to discuss this. So you're free to leave your comments below the video, or to get a hold of me privately if you'd like to do it that way. So I love you guys so much.